Computer. Hello and welcome back to the sixth and indeed final part of the Tony Drayton podcast series, or the 723 podcast series featuring Tony Drayton, whichever way you want to look at it, I guess. So hello again, Tony.
Oh, hello there. Yeah, hi, hi.
Yeah, hi. So this one's going to be a bit different, as we've discussed beforehand. That we've been through your story up until the puppy website is launched. And the reason I thought that was a good sort of bookend was because everything is sort of the adventures of Tony Drayton up to this point. Now we're in a situation where the roaming has largely finished, I suppose, and you start a MySpace for Kill Your Pet Puppy. Uh, so I guess the first question. So this is going to be more of an interview format than just sort of a chronological life telling thing. So I guess my first question is, what motivated you to do a MySpace for Killy Pet Puppy?
Do you think the people know what MySpace, do the kids today know what MySpace is even? Do you want to say what
Well,
MySpace
if
came
they
around?
don't, it was this thing, wasn't it, that was kind of predated Facebook and so on, I guess, where it's sort of started by bands, or four bands, I think, wasn't it? Because you could put music on there,
It
your
was
own
mainly,
music.
yeah. I think it was like Friends Reunited was the beginning of a mass thing.
Mm,
Was Facebook really around? I don't think Facebook was even really around then.
2008, Facebook was.
Right, because this is 19, I think my first experience with MySpace was through my friends like Colin, Tom's, and the Jim Super Stereo World. And
Right.
the art group, fans of the art group called the Confetti Girls, had a MySpace page,
Mm,
and I remember going onto it. What's this MySpace? So they were the first page I ever went onto, the Confetti Girls, and I loved it. And MySpace allowed you to create the theme of your page. Not like Facebook, everyone's got the same bland white page. You could create your patterns. You could put pictures up all over the place. Um, your writing was different fonts all over the place. You could put things. You could basically lay out your page, and people like the Confetti Girls took that to the extreme. Lots of color, lots of confetti for. Like even images of confetti pouring over the place. Um, very funny writing. You could write bloggy bits, or just word bits, just paragraphs. There's all sorts of stuff going on this. I remember looking at this and going, oh, "This is the future. This is the future. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything to do it." Um, there's that. Then Michael Baxter, our friend Penguin, did one for the mob. He set up a MySpace for the mob because there was no access to the mob, and he took it upon himself to basically create a history of the mob and stuff on there by himself. And Mark said that's fantastic, and helped him with it, gave him some graphics. Then would it have come from Penguin? There was discussion possibly with Alistair Livingston about that there was no anarcho-punk. If you Googled anarcho-punk, Alistair Livingston was doing his Green Galloway blog,
yes.
and he had mentioned this. He had said that he's the only, you Google anarcho-punk, all you get is this Andy Martin quote from Smile magazine, which is run by Stuart Home. And he said this is a disgrace. And I thought it was a disgrace. I'm also wondering about Ian Glasper's book. He says up here, The Day the Country Died. I don't think when it actually came out. Did,
It came out about the same time as my Crass book,
which is that's 2000, in the 2000s,
2005, I think.
five, right? Okay, so that's
But he would have written it before that.
this is a bit later then. That this wasn't there in MySpace. Certainly, that was a reaction when we get to the website. Was a reaction to that book.
Mm.
Um, right, so there's things going on, and whether people like Val scout around for pictures of us, the puppy people, and Val sent pictures, and it's like pictures of like groups of punks from the time with names, even it may be Sniffer, Banger, Blogger, and Big Nose, but at least it was names, and I thought this is great. And we put these pictures. I said, Sam was saying to Val, it's great because normally you see a picture of punks, it says punks, and we're actually recognizing who these people are. So this is something that's so yeah. The point was, yeah, I suppose to not promote Kiwi Pet Puppy, but to promote anarcho punk. So this is the hidden story. There's also the book is, of course, John Savage, England's Dreaming, doesn't mention anarcho punk. Something I'd said to him. I'm just thinking about Punk 40 as well. Punk 40, that was 19.
It'd been 2006 or whatever.
It's all slightly later, yeah. So obviously we're building up to that. I'd spoken to John Savage at the England's Dreaming launch. I went to the England's Dreaming launch.
Oh yeah.
And I said to him, "Why didn't you do anarcho punk? And why didn't you put me in?" And he says, "Well, I couldn't find you, bastard. I couldn't find you." And anarcho punk. He thought that's another book. He'd be laughed away. He actually said later. He's actually years and years later. He put into Mojo his interview with Crass. He'd actually interviewed Crass for England's Dreaming, but didn't use it, and he actually published that in Mojo. And so he lied to me at the launch. He could have said that to I did do Crass, but I couldn't be bothered putting them in. So anyway, so this thing's bubbling up there that we thought, yeah, narco-punk should be spoken about, should be remembered, or it will vanish. All people know is
this ties in to an extent with what we talked about last time with the concept of leaving some kind of legacy.
Yeah.
And the fact that you weren't leaving a legacy with street performing because there was no record of it.
Yeah, once the balls are dropped out of the air, there's just thin air left.
Yeah, so the difference here is that the internet gives an opportunity to leave a legacy, I suppose. Well, I don't know if you're anything like me. I had no idea. Just the sort of extent to which the legacy would be left, really. That, anarcho punk, for instance, as a good example, really, is now kind of remembered. There's no danger of it being forgotten now because it's everywhere.
Well, I think that there is two prongs to that, or three prongs. One is that puppy, and we had to take some credit for that because say until we did that, and we started putting articles up about anarcho-punk stuff on there and pictures of the times that it was forgotten. Penguin's Mob One also did the same thing about a specific band, but they also covered that culture. And then Mark himself, who started performing again, started going from not wanting to go back into the past, not wanting to dwell on this stuff, to actually dwelling on it to the extent of reforming the band and taking it out and then playing, and that created a huge buzz. And I think we have to thank Jamie of Blythe Power, who married the model. For the name I've forgotten.
Kate Moss.
That's still, yeah. We have to thank Jamie of Blythe Power for marrying Kate Moss, who had the mob reform for one of Jamie's stag nights. And without that, no, the mob, when they played, they were so knocked out by the reception, by the response that people remembered them, that then they carried on. And Mark's daughter, also thanks to Mark's daughter, who could help organise and set the gigs up, because Mark couldn't do all that side of the organising, logistics of it, and being a manager basically. So she sort of managed them and got them gigs and got them tours and everything, and got the album re-release, wasn't it? And
this is what I wanted to get to the heart of, Rick, I guess, because we have talked about pursuing the spirit or being imbibed with the spirit of everything that happened, certainly from punk rock, but quite probably from the Summer of Love a decade before that. Things take a real turn here, don't they? We're not talking about people having adventures anymore. We're talking about people reliving adventures. And we're not talking about people doing newsworthy things. We're talking about people writing about newsworthy things that were done a long time ago. So everything we're talking about now is beginning to look backwards instead of forwards. And what I want to try and unpick with you is whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, or not just judgmental, but just what it all means, really, I guess, and what it all kind of how it relates, if at all, to the spirit of the original thing.
I think
So,
there's one point there that it wasn't laid out in a plate. We had to rebuild this memory.
mm,
So a lot of what you're saying, we're just looking back. We were actually trying to restore it, like restoring an old building, a neglected and forgotten old edifice, like maybe like an old acropolis, a town that's dug out of the desert, and you have to take a lot of effort to dig it out and find out how important it was because it's been forgotten about.
mm,
The
mm.
lost city, a lost culture. So that's very. I'm very pleased with that analogy.
Yeah,
So
it's a
that
good
took a
one.
lot of work. So it wasn't just looking back and saying here it all was. This is It took us a lot of time. I think MySpace then put a limit on how many photos you could put up.
Mm.
I think Mick Mercer was very enthusiastic MySpace user, and he had this problem. I remember communicating with him, and it was about moving to Facebook or moving. I think first to the website first, then Facebook, maybe the websites.
I think the
Uh,
website would have predated Facebook. I'm not
right.
sure
So
about that, but
this
yeah.
Mick Mercer gave this idea where you can put all the stuff on here, and there's no limit. There's WordPress and all this stuff.
Mm.
Um, so that may be why it then became more serious. You're then taking it out of this MySpace world, which is kind of all fun and happy. And wow, look at this, look at that. It's confetti girls here, there's the mob here, there's some crazy psychedelic band there. There's guy over here, the guy over here that hammers nails into his face. It's everything's going on there. It's just one great big mass of madness. And suddenly you're taking it out and saying, well, we're actually above that with the stormtroopers and the Daleks. We're going to look down on the MySpace people because we've come out of that.
So,
So that was quite a big jump, and I think I remember speaking with yourself about developing it
mm.
and how to make that jump and how not to make it a historical document, how to make it living and how we wanted it to look and what we wanted it to say. I think that was
Yeah,
quite a
I
thing.
always went back to a Ken Kesey quote, which was when he was asked about why he stopped writing and just started doing the merry pranksters instead. He said, "I'd rather be a lightning rod than a seismograph." And
A lightning graph, a seismograph is like a graph. You mean
yeah,
recording? Rather be doing it than recording it.
yeah, essentially, yeah. Um, so that's something that always kind of sat with me in my brain. And the job of a historian, can that be both, perhaps? Can people remembering the history be then inspired to action? Or is it more like what the situationists would have known as recuperation and just kind of bringing it back into the kind of safety net?
I'm not sure that historians can become. I think they can because they can go and talk. And I've done this. I've gone and done talks, and people want me to talk. And I'm doing a talk on the 11th of May,
Mm.
an narco punk revival album. You like the album's songs? So exactly what you hate. You're thinking is packaging up history. The situations would hate it, but at the
I'm
same
not
time,
trying to judge it. I wouldn't say I hate it, but
well, I know what you
I
mean.
wonder if there couldn't be better ways of using energy.
Yeah, I've been asked to talk like what we are about that anarcho punk through the eyes of
Mm.
somebody who went through the first wave of punk and the second and the anarcho punk and how and what it meant and why it still means something today. Uh, and so in that sense, I'm doing that. Other people from that era, Steve Ignorant, are doing stuff like that. They're being asked their thoughts. Though again, he's both lightning rod and was more lightning rod than seismograph. But there are other people. I was thinking about people like Matthew Orley who talk about this stuff. That's another side. We're going to go down that one later. I think about intellectualization
Mm.
of punk. Uh, so I think you can. You can. So to go back, I've done stuff on stages, talks about history stuff. So I've become the historian, lecturing, turning a lecture into a performance. It helps the fact that I've been a performer. That I've done my street trade. Let's take it back. My street entertainment,
Yeah,
because then I know how to keep a crowd and fall over when I have to fall over. I'll stumble on the chair and spill the water over myself. And
do the
I can be
juggling balls. Yeah,
juggle the bottle and throw it all over myself.
yeah.
Or it all goes wrong, just unicycle into the audience. So yeah, so
What's
yes, I
going
think
on at nights like this? What do you think is actually happening? What are they for?
what those nights.
Yeah, this night you're coming up
Yeah,
to do with Steve and Matthew and so on.
I think every time I go to one of these events, I like Max's launch of her books.
Mm,
I've gone to a couple of those, and I think exactly that question you've asked. I think that on my way there, until I sit down, and then I see the way the audience react to the way she talks. And I think they love it. They absolutely love this. This is the secret history. The secret history that I was talking about for street entertainment and history, where it's kings and queens and wars. People
mm,
love this story. Oh, yeah, Max, I was there at the ants. I was there. This happened. I was there at the psychic TV, and this happened. This isn't part of the official history. This is the only place you're going to hear this stuff. The real nuts and bolts of really what happened is through me, and they love it. And even if they don't care about ants or psychic TV, they love the fact here's somebody who's there. So I'm doing this pointing thing. I really had this before. I'll start putting my hands close to the camera. I'll
well, go for it.
time myself.
Perform away. Yeah.
I have to tie myself to the chair. They That's what it's about. People go there. There are some who are reliving it, and there are some who are discovering it, and they want more. And some are just there because they go to these sort of events, and they learn every event. They go and see any person talk because they just love these kind of things.
Mm,
There's a whole bunch of people in this world, and I'll tell you, one of the things I found, and I had to change my tune, was when I was doing my Ripped and Torn talks. I went around promoting Ripped and Torn, and I talked about the ants, and I was talking about the whole thing. I was there, and the early ants, and this happened, and I'd stop at Dirk, and afterwards, people from the audience that come and talk to ask us when you do these talks. It doesn't end at the end of the talk. You've got another hour of people speaking to you about their memories. Uh, and I found people would come up in Bristol and Nottingham, especially those two places, especially, and they'd say the ants changed my life. The Kings of the Wild Frontier album,
right,
and
right.
I'd stop, and I'd never consider. I was pleased I hadn't said in my rants or my talks that they sold out. I never said use the word sold out. I never hate that phrase. Um, but all these people are saying that the Ants album, and they'll say, "Oh, I got the Ants, the Kings of the Wild Frontier," and it had the insert with all the other records on, and I went and discovered all this stuff. It's great. You're so lucky to have been and seen all this stuff. I'd love, and I was thinking, wow, I never thought Kings would have had that. And people are saying that I was 13 or 12 or whatever
Mm,
when I bought that album. And it changed my life, and I became followed punk, and I followed out the Ants back. And from following the Ants back, discovered all the other parts of punk, which
yeah,
they never thought punk was that meant that. They thought punk meant Mohicans and spitting. Because of the Kings of the Wild Frontier album, they discovered it actually meant it's great music. They discovered great music out of it. So again, you can't. This, I learned from those talks not to dismiss stuff, and things that we think took for granted were really important.
do you think then there's an element of we're all still trying to work it all out, and these nights help us edge along that pathway, work out what it meant, but also work out how that affects us now, and how we
Yeah,
take it in the present day.
I think that's true for both the speaker and the audience.
Yeah, yeah.
As you say, that's almost like psychotherapy, that we're all trying to work out why am I this person because of this? Did this get me to this place?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I teach mindfulness amongst other things, and every session I do with anybody is a learning curve for me. And I think you can probably apply that to anything, really.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. You're both teaching each other, regardless of the official capacity of your role or whatever,
yeah.
I
Well, I found that when I
suppose.
was doing the circus skills workshops, to go back to our last thing when I was performing,
Yeah.
um, is when you're teaching people how to juggle, or even when they've learned to juggle and how to teach a trick, you see by what they're going wrong, by how they're getting it wrong. That's how I'm doing it wrong.
Mm.
I've got that same jerk here, or I move this hand too quick. Um, that's I'd go home myself and I'd think, oh yeah, I'm a better juggler. That's my mistake. I'm doing that mistake. So yeah, that's I think it's true that yeah, so they are useful and important, and they'll hopefully they'll carry on. There's also different levels that we've been talking about where they can be just about music, or they can be like the subcultures crowd, Matthew Worley, and they do a whole. There's a whole bunch of people who did the Ripped, Cut, and Torn book, where they really intellectualize and they really look in for more detail into what's the meaning of not of the song, the lyrics, but of the movement. What did it all really mean? And some they obviously they have talks and discussions and lectures and symposiums, and maybe they're all looking at it on a different level, on a higher level,
Higher level, that's interesting. I mean,
deeper level, maybe.
does the search for meaning and intellectualizing, is that the same thing?
What's the first bit you said?
The search for meaning, is the search
Search
for
for
meaning the
meaning.
same
I
thing
think
as
search for meaning is
intellectualizing?
there right from the start. It's right from Sugar Sugar. What does Sugar Sugar by the Archers mean? You know, everyone you say, what does that mean? Well, what that lyric? What does Mark Bolan say at the beginning of 20th Century Boy? You know, you're searching for meaning right at any level. Now you're gonna have to Google, have to YouTube that
Yeah.
now.
So
Friends say it's mine. Friends say it's mean. Friends say it's me. What's he saying? What's he saying?
yeah, yeah.
Or you can go into what you know. I do find that I do get myself a bit lost with the old subcultural crowd. I've not delved that deep into their world. It's not for me. So it's great for them to be doing it. Someone should be doing it. But
Mm.
I don't need to be there.
This whole subculture thing is kind of weird on another level that we're kind of looking back at it now, I would say. Um, but of course, at the time, it was a question of being in it. So
Hmm.
in it. So when I don't know, when the New Romantics came out or whatever, you just thought, okay, that's happening. I wonder what's going to be next, and so on. But now you look at it with as a thing with two bookends, maybe from the Teddy Boys to Acid House or whatever. And I guess you can just argue the detail of that till the cows come home. But that's another thing about the whole youth cults and youth movements and so on. It was a moment in time that we didn't realize. We thought we were just kind of at the start of some, well, I don't know, put thoughts into your head, but I thought this was just going to keep happening. You know, it was going to keep being new youth movements and keep being different mutations and spin offs and all that kind of stuff forever. It didn't occur to me that there'd be an end point as well as a start point.
No,
And
I thought punk as itself was the main trunk of the tree. Would go on forever, and that's why when I read my Ripped and Torn slag offs of like X-Ray Specs singles, saying, "Oh, come on, Polly, we've heard this the third time now. I get to do something new."
mm,
And now back on a single, you know, look at it and go, "This is actually fantastic." Like World Turned Dayglow. You know, I'm an idiot for saying that, but then I thought it'd go on forever. I thought this world would go, and there were spin-offs, branches, if you like, would always come off that tree that never end.
yeah,
So we'd
yeah,
have all this stuff coming up, New Romantics is all linked to punk, all the way up till well, even Spandau Ballets and stuff. It's all had this direct link to the punk tree. Psychobillies, Meteors. I think where did that tree end? Did it end? Because then you had the Nirvana and all those people came in. The grunge stuff came in from America, and
yeah.
that was part of that tree, part of the great you are tree, if you like. The phrase I'm going against using now. But that main trunk of punk that Nirvana and everyone tapped straight into, and step straight into those boots without missing a beat. And then they had their offshoots, which became Riot Girl and everything. And
What do you think about that though? In terms of, I mean, I'm sure there'll be people watching this who would vehemently vehemently. I'm never quite know how you say that. Anyway, it would strongly disagree with the idea that punk ever stopped, of course, because you do still get punk gigs. When the internet came out, a lot of people reformed their
mm,
bands because it was the first time they'd become aware there was any memory of them, let alone any interest. And then it became clear there was, and that it was worldwide and all that sort of stuff. So, what do you think about all that? The big kind of wave of bands reforming and Yeah, well, and that, yeah.
I think there's a double shift there. There was the tribute bands first. You have tribute bands, and then you have bands themselves reforming. And then you have packages where bands, 5 or 6 bands will play, and they'll only play the hits, only play 3 or 4 songs. They
Yeah.
won't, not even for the album, not even attempt to play anything new, and not even
Mm.
attempt to play an obscure song. You're hired just to play your 4 hits, and that's it. Off you go. And they're quite happy to do a tour like that. Um, what do I think about it all? When bands first started reforming and playing, I had a sneer that, well, that'll teach you that when you started not playing your hits and when you started playing gigs and you weren't playing your hits and everyone wanted you just playing the new stuff and everyone walked away and you collapsed and you lost your record deal. Think back on that. Now you're out here on the stage just playing your hits. Think back to that day those days when you thought you were so above everyone, so up yourself that you didn't need this hit anymore. Think back to if you'd done what you're doing now, then you wouldn't have had to stop. You'd have pleased now you're back pleasing the audience. So that's my sneer on it.
So if you don't please the audience, you're up for yourself and you think you're better than everyone else.
I think if people come and they paid their money and they want to see, you do it as your big encore. If you're going to say, I'm now going to play my new album, or you advertise that I'm only going to play my new album, like it
Mm.
or lump it. But if people come to see you and you start off playing new stuff and you only play new stuff, which they've never heard before because the album's not been released, and then you walk off stage and they go, oh, where's this hit? Where's Clappy Clappy?
Yeah.
And they don't come back. Okay, they don't come back to the next one. And then the record company said, and they don't buy the album because all they remember is the disappointment. Those songs are to them a disappointment. Remember when I saw the Kinks back in '75, back in my Glasgow days, and they did a concept album, Arthur, a concept I called it Arthur, and it's advertised as this is going to be Arthur. And we went to it, and Ray Davis comes on and says, "Don't worry, we're going to do the hits afterwards."
Yeah.
And so everyone was happy. That was it. Just a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
So they did the whole concept album Arthur, went off stage, came back and did another set, basically 2 sets, and it's all the hits.
Yeah,
Tell the people.
that's exactly what the only band I go and see anymore is Dexys, and that's what they did with their last album. They
Oh,
played the
really?
new album from start to finish, and then part two was just the crowd pleasers basically,
Yeah, yeah,
and it worked. It
yeah,
worked partly because you knew the crowd pleasers were coming because it wasn't the first date of the tour, so you'd read the review, etc. But if you hadn't, if you didn't know that this is what she's like, or tell me when my light turns green were coming along, then it could have been quite an emotionally frustrating evening.
mm.
Thinking, are they actually going to play anything?
Yeah.
You know.
Well, that exactly what I'm talking about. You because you've gone there for your memory. You want that spark, that bit that's living in you. You want that to be sparked up, and it doesn't.
So how does
But
this sit next to? How does this sit next to all the kind of slagging off of Ted's in 1977 because they'd be going to Pontins for their rock and roll revival weekends,
I never
and
slagged them off.
punk rock was doing something new instead.
I never slagged off Teds for that.
There was a feeling of that, though, wasn't there? A year zero type thing,
Not
and
this Pontin. No, I think the Teds thing brought it upon themselves. They decided to be in opposition. They came out of the woodwork and decided, oh, we don't want this stuff. Um, and they started to, oh, I'm going to attack punks. Um, Partly it was media inspired. You could say this: the Sun newspaper created that. There wasn't many Teds at Kings Road attacking punks until the Sun said Teds are attacking. You know,
mm, mm.
they promoted it basically, a Killer Punk Day, and then bigger Teds. I remember being chased by Teds in South London, and I was kind of both shocked and loved the way they looked. But they looked fantastic. They were standing in some punk gig, some godforsaken place, Tooting or somewhere, and they were hanging around. I said, "There's one." Fat fuckers chasing. I was like, "It was fantastic." No, they could, you know. I remember I
Yeah.
ran into an underground car park and they were going to chase me into it. And I realised anyway. There's no, but I did. I looking back on that, we had a. I'm sorry, there's a Wayne County and Levi and the Rockouts in '78. So in '78, we're trying to create this whole join,
Mm, mm.
and
What
because
I mean was that punk
obviously,
did paint itself as doing something new, and as that being a kind of, a better thing to do than kind of dig out your old Elvis albums or no Elvis Beatles or the Rolling Stones in 1977.
yeah.
So
Well,
I
the thing
mean,
that's the thing. I remember Nick Kent being told when he first joined the NME, he was a young boy, came out of Oz, and he went
mm,
to the NME, and someone there, Fred Della or someone said to him, "Rule one: never slag off Elvis."
really,
Yeah,
okay,
it's way back then. He said, "There's Elvis. If you do any criticize Elvis, they'll be outside waiting to stab you. His fans will be outside. Never
blimey.
criticize Elvis." No one told Joe Strummer that. And unfortunately, Joe Strummer never got the memo.
How do you feel these days? Living in East London, and you've lived this incredible life. I'm sure I mentioned this before. I can't remember whether it was on one of the podcasts or just chatting to you about the end of the film Walkabout, where Jenny Agutter's been in the outback and had this amazing kind of quite feral adventure, and then she, right at the end of the film, fast forwards to her with her husband and possibly a kid in just some flat, and she's back wearing kind of straight clothes and so on, and there's this overwhelming feeling of her just sort of in this new life, that kind of yearning for this adventure she had. And that's, I don't know, do you ever feel like that? I
I
suppose.
think these
Yeah.
days, Jenny would be blogging. She'd have her website up, the web Walkabout days, and blogs and forums and Instagram posts of all their old pictures, and people be posting up their own pictures and following her, and she'd be following them. So you're never alone now. The other thing is then, what you're talking about now, you would be alone, wouldn't you? If you did no contact now, contact is worldwide at the click of a button.
That's so true. Yeah, that was another thing I personally took from that moment where she's hugging her husband. And you think that husband's got no idea. But of course, these days she doesn't have to be alone in that kind of having lived that kind of life, I suppose. But how do you feel? What kind of emotions does it stir up in you to sort of have chats like this and bring it all back?
Sometimes it's a few days later it comes up, and it's something. Especially we've done our stuff. It's the first time I've talked about my life. I think since the Ripped and Torn days, which were done in 2018. Since then, we've talked about stuff which I've never thought about, never talked about. The emotions of going on with all the crowds, all the people, all my friends, enemies of those days, my mistakes, my regrets, my triumphs. We talk about this, and I'm quite bland. And then I'll have them appalling nightmares about it. It'll all come back, and I'll be like almost shivering in the daytime. So I'm like, oh my God, that. I think one thing that's interesting, we had a talk about me living in the south of France in a forest, and I had the
Mm,
one tape, the Bruce Springsteen, "Darkness on the Edge of Town," and I was saying about the songs on that, and I was racing in the street, and I always thought, I like in Cinder's room. In my mind, Cinder's room was always the important one, and we talked about it. And in Darkness, the song itself was a very good song. I remember saying that racing in the streets was something that used to play as the last song, always to resonate. Since then, I played it so many times on YouTube, and it's in my head almost. It's never until we did these podcasts. I hadn't thought of that song for 30 years since that day,
mm.
since I left that forest. And since we had our podcast, it's been in my head all the time. And I played it many, many times on YouTube, with different various versions, lives, demos, whatever version I could get hold of. And I blame you for that, Gerard. Well, I thank you. I also thank you for that,
Yeah, I
Gerard.
was going to say Springsteen's not the worst that could have come out of
No,
his.
but
I would hope.
that's just one example of the things that were
Yeah.
buried in me, and I'd forgotten about. And that through our talks, um, it'd come out, and I'd remembered. I also play Sandy a lot, the Bruce Springsteen song "Sandy," which she won't set herself on fire for me anymore. There's a line in there about the waitress, and that has such a powerful line to me, and that affects me quite a lot. About a lot of stuff we're talking about when they're performing with people. I think one of the things we didn't talk about in the last one was in 1997. I got back with Katie, the circus space Katie, the unicycling girl, the Albert Hall. We did a show,
Yes.
Space Age Rampage, which I think I sent you a picture of, which you
Yes.
can see where I've developed. You can see how at that point, 1997, I developed from coming back to England and being mucking about and everything with, I think, Windsor Safari Park, Santini Brothers, Karachi, Albert Hall Works, meeting Paul Daniels. Everything comes together in that double act. It's just too late. 1997, I was kind of almost I was practically stopping performing, but we put this one final hurrah together, and you can just see that picture. And I think she's just one of the many girls who wouldn't set herself on fire for me anymore.
Are you a what if type person?
What's that?
Are you a what if type person? Do you ponder on what if I'd gone down this different road or whatever?
Oh, endlessly.
Yeah.
It's what I try and do to counteract that. I try to be a yes man.
In what way?
And if someone says, "Do you want to go to this thing or this is happening?" I say yes. I don't say no and then say, "I wish I had. Wonder what if I had? What if I had done?" If I can do it, I try and do it. That's why I'm speaking on the 11th of May.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because if I said, "Oh, I can't be bothered," so yeah, that's the way out of that. The what if is, as the great butthole surface, I think it was, philosophized. It's better to regret something that you've done than something that you haven't done.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Is it the butthole
Absolutely.
surface?
I know that phrase from other places, but I don't know who's to blame for it, or to thank for it. The whole blame thank thing again.
Might be
Um,
for, not actually, might be Fugazi. I don't know. See,
did you
I
go
don't,
into all that American stuff then?
again through my sister's boyfriend, Ali. He loved all that stuff. Actually, I did a show in Dorset once with Fugazi as my final song. I was on a unicycle, juggling not fire because I was inside a hall, but I leapt off this tall unicycle. I leapt off a bit of my motif, leapt off into the audience, and then Fugazi was playing, and then this is going to cue as I jumped off the unicycle. The sound guy put this Fugazi song on. Well, I jumped off and bang! It's a real explosion of punk joy.
I could
That's
imagine.
another cracking shaft. Let's remember. See, it's all coming. It's all pouring out of me now. Coming out of me.
Yeah, the life
Oozing,
pours out of you.
bleeding out of me. Bleeding out of me.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And of course, something else that we said we were going to mention as well is the feedback we've had since we did the first podcast, or you've had, I should say, really, um, about people getting in touch who you haven't seen for a long time and so on. So
Mm.
that's also kind of folds itself back into the story here, doesn't it?
It's about the historian. We're not talking so much about repackaging anarcho-punk now. Well, there were when I go to these events, the Max events and other things. I met David Insurrection the other day. He did some photos of me at
Yes.
the old puppy buildings. Perfect, up your example of repackaging. I'm happy to do it. Again, I'm a yes man. Do you want to come and do this? Why not? Why should I say no? If I say no, I'll regret it.
Yeah.
So anyway, went there, stood in the rain. But he said how much he's loved the broadcast. He's loved the podcast. It's really been inspiring. At the Max events, people would come up and said, "Oh, that's crazy! You said that stuff. You know, remember that when you talked about." Well, he actually mentioned details. I was at that gig you talked about. I was there. I did that. I remember that. You know, Alex Ferguson, as we talked about, who has come out. He came out. Max pulled him out of the woodwork for her launch, and he spoke to me, and we talked. And because obviously I mentioned him a lot in our podcasts. I
Yes.
mentioned him. He brings it up. He's listened to the lot, and he pulls me up on things.
Yeah.
And he also says how much it inspired him. He remembers this, and he tells me stories about the pub squat in Frestonia,
Mm.
And he said, "Oh, that reminds me. Oh, that reminded me of this and this other thing." And about psychic TV, he said, "That reminds me of this event." Um, then the most amazing one was when we talked about me doing this show in Esparreguera in 1985, when I was performing as a juggler. And I mentioned to you that would worked in Esparreguera with the Ukrainian mountain troop. And other people would come down from the circus space, and not say what circus space at that point, is City Lit and other London jugglers. And at work, my work, I do work, Jared. I do. Some people do find me employable.
Yeah.
At my work, my phone rang, and it was a guy who had been at Esparreguera, who listened to our broadcast. He's living in Scotland. He's bringing a show to London on the weekend, about 4 days' time, and I have to be there to see him. I hadn't spoken to this guy since probably 88,
Yeah.
since 1988. Your podcast, somehow, this is what people can do, the magic of the world. They managed to phone me at work. How he did that? I asked him, how did you get that number? And I think, anyway, he's a magician. What can you say?
It was fun, actually.
That came straight from your podcast, and I did go to his event, and it's a thing called Commedia dell'arte, which is a form of Italian clowning pantomime. It was a commedia event, a weekend of commedia, and I went there. I met him, and on the second day, or the first first day. There's 2 days anyway. Over 2 days, a whole bunch of people from the stuff we talked. It also pulled them out the woodwork. Stuff we talked about in the podcasts, people had mentioned, and people I'd thought about as we were talking about, were all there. It's almost like a convention, and lots of these people had never been to a commedia event before. They'd all come. They'd all been drawn for some reason. They'd all decided to come on this weekend. And I was speaking to people I did the prison with, the women's prison. So in the previous last podcast we did, I
Wow.
talked about performing in a women's prison. One of the people who performed there with me was there. He'd never been to this comedy. He was just decided to come, and there we were. And there's another guy I hadn't talked about. We went to Lindisfarne. Me and this guy who turned up, and he reminded me that the two of us went to do a show in Berwick, in a holiday park in Berwick. And whilst we went to Berwick, we went to Lindisfarne, the Holy Island,
Yeah.
en route, and it rained, and we had a whole adventure. And that's the same time Lady Di had died. And it reminded me that we drove up just ahead of her cortege coming up the M1 up to Northampton. We were leaving London. There's police on every bridge, and the motorway was closed. Apart straight after us, they were closing the motorway. We were practically the last car to go up the motorway. And I'd forgotten about all that until that commedia event. This guy was there, Richard Handley. It's like, so there's two major events in my life in which I should have mentioned that Di one that happened there. Susie Oddball of the Oddballs company, who were very, very powerful for me at the start of my performing. So so all this came out. It's weird because the one guy who called me came out, called me and pulled me to this event, and I gave him the yes man. The yes man, go. Why should I say no? I was reluctant. Rotherhithe. It's in Rotherhithe. Oh God, that's not London. But yes man, go. He said, I demand you come. Jerry says, I demand you come and see me. Okay, Jerry. So that is not only a response to it, but a total build on.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's also a branch from that, which is Jerry. When I was speaking to Jerry, it reminded me that my street trading degree about revolt, I wrote a whole piece about commedia. I wrote a whole section on commedia and puppetry and how in France Mr. Punch grew because there's Mr. Punch is from commedia. It comes out of commedia, Punch
Okay.
and Judy.
Yeah.
Developed because the commedia acts were being silenced, censored in France because they were being sarcastic about the mistress of the president, whoever it was at the time, and so the actors were being silenced, and so they used to perform. The theatres weren't allowed to put them on, so they go and do it in the street. This is why it became part of my thesis. They go and work in the street with a piece of paper pointing at words, pointing at the lines on rather than speaking them. And then they weren't allowed to have actors pointing, so they got puppets. They made puppets pointing. The puppet would point at the words, and then they weren't allowed to have the words, and so it became mime. The puppets were then miming, and that became, so the puppetry became Mr. Punch. So they became more like mime puppets.
Wow.
Puppets became very expressionistic, and that Punch. And then when they clamped down on that, they moved it to England, and by that point became Mr. Punch, because that was the most powerful. That's the one they could make money off. Mr. Punch.
This is a fascinating thread of stuff, isn't it? Because Mr. Punch, well, Punch and Judy is a very rebellious thing. I would think that's reasonably well known that Punch and Judy has got quite an anarchic, rebellious sort of streak to it. And but almost Mr. Punch almost also looks like he could be in the Wicker Man as well. So you've got this.
I think he is, isn't he? Someone's dressed as. I'm sure someone dressed as Punch
Yeah, that's why. That's exactly
at the,
what.
at
Yeah,
the parade.
yeah, yeah. That's right. Yeah. So you've got all these kind of different threads, all kind of feeding into the same spirit as punk rock in a
Oh,
funny kind of way. And
because imagine me doing this stuff, discovering this stuff, and I'm writing this thing in 1991. I'm performing at Windsor Safari Park, and I'm
yeah,
discovering this madness. Saying there's more about how commedia. I actually build a thing from the Cathars in France into the beginning of commedia. So
I
that's
thought
a
you
whole different
just,
world. But all that came up. All that came up. I
I
remember.
thought you just shifted. I thought you just done a sideways shift when you took before we spoke in all these podcasts. I thought you'd done a sideways shift from punk rock to being a clown. I didn't really understand that there was a common thread going through it, apart from dressing up, perhaps. But I think I can see much more of one now.
Yeah, I always thought there was something there that said that spark. But so what I took this. Again, we're going a bit sidetracked, but this all kind of came. It's all I blame you for all this. That this I had all this buried for years. So I wrote it in 1994. That this Harlequin, the word Harlequin, which is famous for commedia, he's the main person
Right.
in commedia, and of course we know Harlequin as the pantomime, I suppose. But he in France is a thing called the Harlequin and the Wild Hunt, which is like the bogeyman. The Harlequin and his dead, his ghosts and his ghostly dogs and wolves would be seen roaming France in the 14th, 15th century, 13th, 14th, so 12th to 13th. Always get these 12th, 13th, 14th. So Harlequin was known. That's the first known use of the word Harlequin. It was known in France as a bogeyman. And then when the Cathars, who were in the south of France, they were a religion who were then suppressed by the Catholic Church. If I get this right, suppressed, and they were closed down. But when the army and the priests and everyone went to try and clear out their final citadel, there was very few people there. And a few months later, commedia started in Sicily. I say Sicily, one of the islands on the south of Italy. This thing called commedia started, and it's based French speaking, based around someone called Harlequin. And to me, I try and link this the fact that these Cathars snuck out the back of their castle on a mountainside, snuck down, got on a boat, went not very far away to an island in Sicily, and rebuilt themselves disguised themselves as a commedia, as a comedy troupe, and then carried their feeling, their spirit, if you like, back into the world from the islands all the way up to Italy, across to France, back to France, which is the very important thing. And they became very, very popular in France, in Paris, until they got clamped down again, and then they moved it to Mr. Punch. So not just a bit of a quite a story I chuck into these things.
Yeah,
I also chuck in the tarot cards into this as well, and the Fool, that they came out about the same time.
there's so much of what you just said that's got parallels in how your life's gone, isn't there? Really, or the sort of world you've inhabited, I guess.
Yeah, apart from being spiritual, the Cathars being more punk rock, driven
Mm.
out, can be disguised as a clown.
Yeah, disguised as a clown. Exactly.
Yeah,
Tony Drayton, disguised as a clown.
that's it.
Yeah. So do you think you've been a yes man throughout? And that's where the kind of sheer volume of your adventures has kind of come from?
I think I've said no too many times. I just wish I said yes more.
Really?
Um, yeah. Uh,
Well, you wouldn't have had
I
much
think
time to fit.
I think about breaking through. I think sometimes, yeah, I'll tell you where there was the enemy and everything. I'm not saying yes to becoming a full-time proper journalist and taking that seriously, doing that properly. But I think the same issue I had when I was becoming a performer, not taking it seriously, not making that thinking this is my career. Get the proper stuff in. So both those times, I kind of backed away. But I backed away from, I could say, selling out or conforming, but maybe just it sounded like too much like hard work. I don't know. Maybe I was afraid of hard work. And so I put much more hard work into doing it myself than I would have done.
Well,
Yeah,
that's the story of any self-employment, I would suggest,
yeah.
actually. Yeah. That's really interesting because if you'd have done the full-time journalism thing, you'd never have been a clown, would you?
No, no, completely sliding doors effect. And would I have had books out? Would I have been great, or would I have just burned out?
Yeah.
Or I have nothing to show for it.
And would we be sitting here today talking about it all?
No, who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um.
no, yeah. So
Yeah.
but yeah, the yes man thing I think has come up. I think that mid nineties actually, mid 90s. I read something about that. I was reading about stuff. I remember going for the ferries and things, and writing for Rough Guide. These are signs and doing the Jim Bob thing at the Hope and Anchor. These are things where you can see there's a shift. I mean, do it. You know, just do it. Don't pretend you're above all this stuff.
Mm.
Do it. And I think that's then it kind of again came up. And actually, a weird thing happened in 2015. If we're going to go back to a bit of a chronology here, 2015, jumping way forward. 2015, the council restructured themselves. I worked for the local council. They restructured themselves, and they were demoting my job. My job was being demerited, and rather than debate the issue, I went and I started a mini golf course. There's an advert somewhere, and they wanted someone to run this mini golf course. I went to it, went to the interview. It was a hole in the ground. It was just some mud. It wasn't set up, and I thought, yeah, I'll take on this. This sounds great. I thought maybe this is what I've been building towards all my life.
Absolutely.
But I could say the flag for this is way back where I haven't mentioned this before. Is I was working with my friend Colin from Music 100. We had a radio show. We started doing a radio show together for a local radio station out in Essex. And on that show, there's a Sunday, we do it every Sunday afternoon. On that show, we interviewed somebody about mini golf. We got somebody in. I saw it somewhere. I got this guy out. A mini golf tournament, or crazy golf, as we probably call it, crazy golf tournament. And I thought this sounds mad. It's just fun. What's this tournament about? So I got this guy into the show, and he talked, and it was great. He really opened our eyes about the world of mini golf and different balls. He said you can take different balls and different surfaces. He brought all these things in, and there was the flag, the beginning, the germ of my mini golf. it stuck with me that it's actually more than just mucking about, like punk rock and circus. Here's another undiscovered waste of time. It's actually not a waste of time. Um, and so, yeah, I left account, so I just leapt into that. And in the end, there's not enough autonomy. This is cut to the end, cut to the chase. That there's not enough autonomy. That from what I was promised at the beginning, this hole in the ground, sitting with these guys saying, "Yeah, turn this into a golf course." Yeah, and which I did. I turned it in, but there's always questions and backs and forwards, and why are you doing this and that, and you shouldn't have done that.
Mm.
And I did actually have ideas of turning this into a big event. I knew my corporate entertainment. I could see this being a daytime, guys come in, pay their money and play, but in the evening have corporate events here with food. Have a whole food and music and do what you like on the course. That's what I saw straight away. Not mucking about, not the day-to-day thing, but this as a corporate thing. From my experience, that's what my experience is going to. I didn't tell them this at the time. But then I'm up and running. I realised that this wasn't for me. There's too much restriction. Again, probably a bit like if I'd gone to the enemy and been a journalist, or I'd taken a proper serious show off with an agent. There'd be too much restriction. Don't do that. Do this. And that was like, don't do this. Don't do that. And I thought it's already not for me because I want this myself. I need to do it myself. And even at the end of it, I got them up and running. I got to the opening day. I got that hole in the ground turned into a golf course. I remember one time I got a phone call, a lorry saying, "We've got 2 tons of mulch. Where do you want us to put it? We'll be here in half an hour." And I think, what the hell is mulch?
Yeah. Blimey.
Which is like wood chip, as I found out, as I managed to find out. Anyway, then I got to put it down. But so things like that went on, and I got everything up and running. At the end of it, I just said to them, "Thanks." I said thanks. You have a 6 month probation period, but either party can say that's enough.
Right.
I said, I've got you up and going. You're running now. I made you a fortune. That first week I'd been running, I made because I was seeing what was coming on the other courses, and I said, I've made 5 times what everyone else is making. It's up to you now. I can't. Yeah, I can't. They had a little meeting with them. I said about the autonomy. I said, you told me it was going to be more like this. It'd be hands off. Well, I can see his hands around my throat. And they said, well, he said, it's not me. The guy speaking to me said, it's not me. It's by the finance people. And he said, really, what you want? If you're running your own, but you have to, set your own one up. Then you can do what you like. That's fair enough. So we left in good terms. Well,
I've really,
that's a yes. So that's just another leap into the dark, and it failed, but not just kind of failed in a way that I couldn't see myself trapped there the rest of my life.
yeah, a glorious failure, as Malcolm McLaren would have it, I suppose. Um, I think partly what I've been trying to uncover here is stuff in my own head, really, about why are we talking about all this? What are we both doing sitting here? And I think what you've said has really kind of made me think what we're undoing is a secret history, or indeed more than one secret history. Like you say, that's a really kind of interesting way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, hopefully, YouTube will just leave this stuff up long after we're gone. That would be a document, I
Well,
suppose.
people download these things and they store them.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah,
just if YouTube wipe it. Someone's got it somewhere.
yeah, yeah. So I think that's probably a good place to leave it after such.
No, what I say, I think we just go back to the Kiwi Pet Puppy. Go back to the start. Why did we start Kiwi Pet Puppy website? And is that or do we have to bother? We kind of started that. It's still going to this day. We still do things to this day. And it's now run by Jolly Better Badges in New York, which is another throwback,
Mm,
and it ties itself together with a
yes.
total credibility. Sometimes I look at the figures, and lots of people log on to it. It's now more history. Penguin put lots and lots of uploads onto it and
Mm,
links to uploads, which people love. I mean, Ari Up sent a message saying it's great. She's just one of her children, his son or daughter, I can't remember. showed her how to access it and access all the songs on it. And she's like, it's fantastic. Thanks for putting all this stuff up and taking the time. And again, that goes back to your thing, who's it for? It can be for
Yeah.
anyone who wants to find out.
Plus, of course, punk started off being a kind of US UK thing, but now it's completely global. So I'd imagine there's quite a lot of people from all around the world
Mm.
accessing it as well. And you have all these little kind of scenes in Peru or Mexico or Malaysia or whatever, I guess. So it's a nice way of connecting all that up as well.
Yeah, yeah. There was a
And
thing we're
yeah.
talking about books as well. I was saying part of it when we did the website, the was Ian Glasper's book, the
Oh
day
yes.
the day
Yeah.
the country died.
Yeah.
I'm gonna burn it now. But his book is just about bands. It's a whole list of bands. Even though in the band interviews, like Hagar the Womb and People of the Mob, they mention Kill Your Puppy, they mention Puppy Mansions and the importance of this stuff in Central America. He doesn't try and make a story of it. It's just band after band after band. And I think that's speaking to you about it, or some Penguin, and saying we need to do a book, or Alistair. So we do a book with no bands in it.
Mm,
The
mm.
complete antithesis of Glasper's book. There's no bands, just the scene. And I remember when we did the Poppy stuff and we put pieces about, I remember one about Camberwell Buildings, a piece about which was a squat in South London. And we got about 80 responses, 80 replies to it. And some of those replies are very, very long. And say, this is the book that it's writing itself. This is
And
what we want.
that thread, I remember that one specifically because it led to phone
Gary
calls and
Critchley.
messages, the Gary Critchley, Free Gary Critchley campaign, which ultimately he did get freed after almost
Mm.
30 years in prison. And yeah, yet again, the unintended or the surprising consequences of these things, you don't know where it's going to go, do you?
No. The only flaw in the plan, because that was happening, it wasn't the only one. There was lots, almost every thing we put up. People put loads of stuff up. Oh, it's the first time I've ever been allowed to talk, so I'm vanishing here. But all the people were posting the first time I talked about this, and they all giving their memories about it. And I think this is exactly, so I'm just refueling the engine here.
Yeah, fair enough.
Um, they it was done. It was basically pretty much written. I feel like Del Blyben put masses of stuff up.
Yeah, yeah.
Powerfully written, really useful, completely in context. And I remember sitting with you in Leicester Square talking about the puppy website and saying the only flaw in the plan is that I may be offered a full-time job at the council tomorrow.
I remember you had your clown suit with you, the light blue sequins with the gold stars and stuff like that.
I wasn't wearing it, surely.
No, you weren't wearing it. Yeah, I don't know why you had it with you. You had it in a bag and you showed me it. Yeah,
Oh, right.
yeah,
So that's where the beginnings of this podcast be carrying
yeah,
that. That's the germ of that podcast.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, so we had all this stuff was going to happen, but at the same time, I was having to think about settling down. At this point, I had two children, a mortgage, a wife, um, and they did. The council then, if they haven't got me enough for the job, I'd just be relying on the Cookie Pet Puppy website to be my future,
Mm.
and the book and everything that would be 100% focused on that. As it was, the council then offered. I was working part time for them at the time, and then so they just made my post full time, which then meant I couldn't then devote my time to the puppy book. And so the website was running. So Penguin started doing more of the stuff for it than me. And I'm still working for the council, still working for the Yankee dollar, as it's good to say. And what can I say? Is that 15 years, 17, so 15 years or so, 16 years.
Must be, yeah, must be. Because I, yeah, it was before I wrote the press book, and that was 2005. So we could, although by the time it went up, because there's this picture of the press book cover, isn't there? So it would have been about then. So yeah,
But
yeah,
they added them. I think when
17,
they
18
added,
years.
you used to have the Mob reissue and the Blood and Roses reissue
Yeah,
referencing each other.
that's
But
right.
then
Yeah.
the crash book was put on when that came out later.
Was it? Oh,
Well, or maybe all three were put on later. But
yeah.
so it was. I've got it down as 2007. I don't know. I think we also had talks about a couple of years later. We revamped it. We did other stuff as well.
Mm.
But that was the thing. That was the problem with me being part of this great big revivalist campaign and having a puppy book, which would have been the anti-Ian Glasper book, was me actually then having to do, as you're saying, why did I, why not cave in, become a full-time journalist or this? So I could have aimed for TV when I was performing. I could have been aiming for TV. And one of my fellow performers at Covent Garden at that time, of course, is Eddie Izzard.
Really?
He went on to great things.
Wow.
But they were actually much better performers than him that never moved on, or not. They moved on from Covent Garden. They're too old to perform now, but they never broke through. Captain Keno, who actually at that Commedia event, Susie Oddball was then saying she'd seen Captain Keno yesterday. It's like, Captain Keno. A guy had seen captivate the Covent Garden. Or he'd do shows when he weren't meant to do shows. He'd go out in the evening when he weren't meant to do shows, and he would just stand there and he'd fill the whole place with an hour-long show. One of the best people I've ever seen, best performances I've ever seen. Honest comedians, performers. He would just do a show, unbelievable. And he just mucked himself up. And he said, people saying he used to get bookings or be asked to do a booking, he'd quote a price, and they'd phone back an hour later to confirm it and say, it's gone up now. Stuff like that. And you're saying about me not buckling down. He just thought he'd live forever. Just thought he'd live forever. Yeah.
Is he still about?
Yeah, as I say, Susie, she showed me a picture of him.
Oh, sorry, you said, yeah. I beg
Yeah, she showed me a picture of him with a big white beard, like Captain Birdseye or Albert from Fools and Horses.
Yeah.
My God. But yeah, they say Eddie was there. Eddie just had that focus. And when he broke away, he had a double act, and he broke away from his double act. And his show, I bought my first unicycle. I bought off him.
Wow.
And so but he just started doing a show with a big tall unicycle. But so he had a tall unicycle, but his whole show is just running on and off. At that point, we had the Leslie Crowther song "Come On Down," Leslie Crowther's TV show "Come On Down." He just used that "Come On Down." He'd just run on, shout "Come On Down," and people shout "Come On Down" back. Go back and run on again. "Come on down," and shout louder. That seemed to go about 20 minutes. And he'd do this and wave in his arms and stuff, and hold his unicycle and go back on. And that was his show. I don't think he ever got on the bike.
Do you think you settled down at the right moment? Because I'd imagine driving about on a unicycle might not be something you can do when you're 70 so easily, for instance.
It was 1999 in St. John's Park Mansions. We were still I was Mace Housing Co-op chairman of the Mace Housing Co-op House, short life housing, thinking, do I want to still be doing this in the 21st century? You want to get older, living hand to mouth, being evicted, because those short, Mace co-ops, housing co-ops, you could be evicted in a month's notice. And so I've moved about 5 different houses of them. And before that was squatting. I was like, do I want to keep doing this now? It's more not the age, but the 21st century. And so 1999, we thought, let's buy somewhere. And because where we were living in Archway, which is St. John's Park Mansions, we had Highgate to one side, Islington to one side, Hampstead to one side. All a bit expensive. We started looking around somewhere to buy. And we finished up Leytonstone. We looked for the balance between what we could afford and location and how far close we were to where we were. And this is Leytonstone, which is quite a way. So in 2020, we were in my first house. So I thought, yeah, I thought that was the reason.
Yeah.
That was the reason.
Of course, you got quite lucky there, didn't you? Because East London's changed astonishingly over the years, really.
I think strangely where we moved to, it's historically Rebella Valley and Poison Girls territory, and reclaiming streets started there because the A12 is now plows right through Leytonstone to and it goes up to the A406 and to the M11. Um, and this was the road that was vehemently demonstrated against the A12 being driven through
I
Leytonstone.
remember. They,
Remember all that reclaimed this? So all the houses, all the flags, everything,
yeah.
and that revolution failed. And because it failed, it made the enclave of what they call it Upper Leytonstone around the A12. They blocked, and by the time we moved in, they blocked off lots of the streets. So it's very hard to get into it. There's a one little route into it. So it becomes like a village to stop rat running. Because basically what's happening, that part of Leytonstone, that what the reclaiming streets people don't say, and what people who lived there who I spoke to when we moved in, was it's just one giant rat run. The whole of Upper Leytonstone was just a rat run. And so by pushing everyone onto one road, one big road, they blocked off the street, blocked off access to these streets. It meant we moved into basically a village. The revolution failed, but what came out of it was a beautiful undiscovered part of London. And so I had mixed feelings because I knew the name when we were talking about Leytonstone, where we were looking at. I thought, yeah, this is right in the fighting territory. And then it was beautiful because there's no traffic. All the traffic was on this big road. It was the right thing to do. It also meant that all the shops and everything is one side of the A12, and all the residential bits even quieter because it's completely separated. You go over bridges, nice little bridges across the A12, which I enjoy. You've got a great urbanistic view. You have a bridge and you have this great thundering motorway basically running through the area, and you can see from that bridge, you can see the whole of central London. And when the sun goes down, it looks fantastic. Ah, and even better for us, even better. Number one was the housing explosion, price explosion,
Mm.
where we sold that flat, bought it in 1999. 2002, 3 years later, we sold it for double the price. Bought a house around the corner, a big, where we're living now, where we are now, 4-bedroom house, giant 4-bedroom house, which is still underpriced at the time because no one really was buying these people. All the families had moved out, so these houses were being left or being bought by people trying to split them into lots of flats. So we managed to beat the flat people who bought this one. So we did very well out of moving out of, again, you're saying the right time to sell and buy, right time to buy, because we now had security. And then, my God, the price just rocketed. And then that was 2002. And then in 2012, we had the Olympics.
Oh, of course, yeah. Yeah.
Which is the wasteland, Stratford wasteland, became desirable.
Mm.
The price of our house and our area went through the roof. I was
You think?
speaking to somebody, Simon Ricks. So he lives in this area now. He was saying about his house. They'd got a house. They were offered to buy it at some point, some place in Hackney. They were squatting it, and they were offered to buy it, and they didn't buy it. They just something. He did something, and he says he now looks back at the price of that house. I think that house has made more money than I have. Yeah. It was like 75,000 at the time. It's now 3 million. He said if he'd bought the house, and done nothing. If I'd done nothing in my life, I'd have made more money than what I've done since.
Yeah. It's crazy, isn't it? Do you think you're done roaming, metaphorically and graphically and so on?
The last time I roamed significantly was 2014 when I was in the Sahara Desert. And it was such a powerful place to be. I felt my Ulaanbaatar urge was, which had been aching since being in Karachi, and the Chinese acrobats say Ulaanbaatar was the worst place in the world. And I felt being in the Sahara Desert was as close as I'm going to get, as I need to get now, to Ulaanbaatar, or to the Antarctica, or to the Arctic, or Tibet, Lhasa, even Kathmandu. I remember standing there with I had my camel Morris. There was a camel called Morris, and me and Morris. I just looked at Morris. And I'm done roaming.
Right.
I think that was because I thought I'm there. I've done something mad. This is mad enough to be in the Sahara, and I don't need. I don't. This is what it's like. You know, unless something happens, unless I get offered somewhere to go somewhere like the Antarctic. But I think about the Antarctic. It was one of my dreams to be the Antarctic. But then same as Ulaanbaatar or Lhasa. But no, I think do I need to be there now? Do I need to be? I've Googled. I've gone on Google Maps. I've traipsed around places now, right? Which you couldn't have done back when you think, what's it like? What's it like? I've watched YouTube people of being in places. Yeah, I've watched YouTube people of being in Lhasa. I had that feeling as well in Thailand. Actually, I didn't mention the Thailand in 1999 before we bought the flat. We had a final fling going crazy, went to Thailand. And we went to Sukhothai, middle. No one really goes to Sukhothai, middle of Thailand. There's a great big abandoned temple, village, town, you call it. Lots of Buddhas all over the place. I remember being there thinking, this is nirvana to me. I've hit Satar, I've hit it. So I love Bangkok. I absolutely loved Bangkok. I loved the Khao San Road. Got that great hit off that. So I kind of had that exotic. And of course I've worked in Karachi and Doha. So I feel, yeah, so I'm saying basically, I feel like I've done roaming, but if someone came and said, do you want to go to the Antarctic tomorrow? I'm a yes man.
Well, what a great place to leave it. I think that would be. This is almost feels like the end of an era. We've talked for such a long time over these podcasts, and it's been absolutely fascinating. And yeah, it sort of feels a little bit like the end of an Indiana Jones film now, I suppose. You know, when he took.
Not the one where you open the warehouse and there's all the there's coffins, not the coffins, the things there. Oh, yes, I need to research this. You throw me into it.
Sorry.
Well, they look for something. They look for something, don't they?
Well, they always look for something, I guess. Yeah, yeah.
It's that religious thing where it's not the Holy Grail. Something else.
Crystal something or other. Yeah.
I
I was
mean,
just talking generic Indiana,
yeah,
really.
there's one where you think it's over, and then they've gone and they found this one, and they've brought it to safety, but they've taken it away from the Nazis.
Well,
And
maybe this podcast series will end like that. Maybe we think it's over, but who knows?
then you open the door, and there's 1,000 more behind the door.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's right. He gets to the final room and notices 10 more doors leading off other places or
Well,
whatever.
that's what it feels when I speak to you. Every time I speak to you, there's 10 doors off each thing I say to you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what's been really interesting about it, I think. So yeah, let's never say never. But for now, I'm glad you've been a yes man on all this. It's been absolutely brilliant, and I'd like to thank you so much for your time and your energy as well. You know, researching it all and sending pictures and all that kind of stuff, because that's really kind of contributed to making it something people seem to have enjoyed. So that's great. Yeah. So I'll stay on and chat to you a bit more. But for the purposes of the recording, thank you so much, Tony Drayton.
Thanks for now.